Hey guys, on this vlog I went up to Wisconsin and went to Dan Infalt's whitetail workshop, or the hunting beast workshop. If you ever get a chance to go up there and do that, please go. You'll learn so much. I hear a lot of guys post on Facebook and stuff, man, I wish I could go. Quit wishing, go. They're worth the money. They're not that expensive. And all those guys at the hunting beast are just class A people. So support those guys, buy their shirts, buy their sticks. It's all high quality stuff and it's all worth the money. So this is a long one, but it has so much good information. Not only buck bedding information, but just Dan tells some pretty cool stories during the workshop, and I got all that on video. So bear with the video and just watch it all. See ya.
Usually what I do is I'll find out about a big buck, I'll get a picture of a big buck, or I'll see a big buck and I'll start hunting it. And then what I do is I make sure he's around, I find sign and stuff, and then I hunt down to bedding areas in that area and I'll run into him sooner or later. Yeah.
So you do a lot of shining, or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you gotta start slacking.
How many of you guys watched that last video I did last day? Yeah, that was right here. I was monitoring those fields across the road over there, and there's deer crossing that road quite a bit in the evening and morning. And then when I came over here, I noticed that this whole field had tracks going into it, and deer digging through the corn for the old corn. And at that time, there was no tracks at all in the snow in the parking lot over there. So I followed the tracks back, and I was concerned they might be in that little cattail marsh down there, but they weren't. They went through it and over the hill here. And then when I got here and all the tracks came down here, I assumed that the bedding would probably be underneath that willow there, the one that's on an angle behind the pine trees, or over in those cedars over there. Now look at how close the road is. And what happens here is that logging road you just saw pulls all the people back to the big woods over there. They all want timber. So all the people hunt back there. But I'm always looking for this stuff along the road here like this. And actually there was quite a few bucks in here too, that were feeding across the street too. They're all gone now from people walking and looking for sheds and stuff. But I followed the tracks around. A lot of them went right along the road and around here, and some of them went over the hill. And for the most part, they filtered into the grass right here. And then I'm assuming they're going around the corner. So looking, there's really nowhere I could get in that tree down there without getting busted. So what I ended up doing is sitting right behind that down tree there, that dirt one. And I don't know if you can see it in the video, but in the background, while the doe was out by me, there was several bucks starting to pile out too. They just weren't really big. That's the stump I was sitting behind when I shot. And I want to show you how close I was to the bedding. I mean, you're not going to see the deer up here by the parking lot in daylight, right? So literally you got to be this close. I mean, so I'm maybe 200 yards from the parking lot, 80 yards from the road. There's people walking up and down the road, dogs. I mean, if you're watching the video close, you probably saw me draw when a car went by. I used the car for draw. This is a pretty vast area, and I think a lot of people are kind of like, well, where do I go? And what I'm looking at is I just want to follow this terrain. So I would, looking at this terrain, I'm going to drop in to where those trees meet the cattails, and I'm going to follow it. Now, knowing from experience, I know that when I get up by that woods, I'm going to get up to where there's pressure, and I'm going to stop seeing deer. So the guys that come down that trail cut into the corner down there and go into that woods. And as soon as you start following this, as soon as you get to about where those big willows are along this edge over here, you'll stop seeing deer sign, and that's because that's where the 100 yards up the people go through. So really it's just a matter of where don't people go is where these big bucks are. And they still got to have that terrain feature of that edge and that surrounded by water in this swampy terrain, but it's where people don't go. It's the hide and seek kind of thing. You got to remember, a deer isn't like a person. We base pressure on what we see, like tracks and stuff. They base it on scent, and scent stays around for a long time. Maybe 30, 40 days. Maybe a dog can't follow you after 10 or 15, but there's still scent lingering there, unless there's extreme weather or something. So it's always bothering them that they know you've been around. So they're going to go to the spots where people just don't go. And it's really a matter of thinking, well, where don't people go? And then finding the terrain they need to survive.
So I'll be honest, I would totally overlook this spot right here. It's super close to the road. I look there, and you're right. I don't know if there's anything there. Would you say a large percentage of areas just like this, in fact, are holding, or like you said, you got to figure that out. But would you say a lot of the big buck spots are spots just like this area right here?
I would. I would caution that, I mean, we look at this and you don't think every spot's like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you still got to get in there and look around and make sure. But go in there, and those are the spots you should be scouting. And to answer your question, I look back at my bucks, and the majority of my bucks didn't come from spots like that, but the majority of my mature ones did. I think out of the top 5 bucks that I've shot, probably 3 of them were within 100 yards of a road.
I find it interesting, Dan. I listen to your stuff, and sometimes I realize, even though I'm listening, I don't get it. And this used to be one of those things in terms of overlooked spots. And I ended up re-listening to the podcast series and some other things, and I heard you say it a couple more times, look for the overlooked spots. So I went on Onyx and I found like 10 spots that I would just never think to go. And I put 15 miles on the snowshoes last weekend, and out of 5 of the spots I looked at, 3 of them had great looking buck bedding. So I just realized it's, you know, even though I hear you sometimes, it's like, man, I wasn't listening, I wasn't getting it, because this is a prime example of, I just walked right by it.
And it really is the old cliche that's getting a little worn out, but the fat girl thing. I mean, you look at this and you're kind of embarrassed to tell your friends you hunt there, but that's where I'm killing the stuff, you know. You know, right underneath these guys, I mean, everybody's bragging about, yeah, I got this pack, I can go 10 miles back, and I got, you know, a pocket full of candy bars and my soda, and I'm gonna go out there and be rugged and quarter this deer out. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm gonna walk 10 yards off the road and I'm gonna drag it to my truck in the dark when nobody's looking. You had to get in there somehow without them knowing it. And for me, a lot of times, if I can't kill them there, what I would do is just put a little pressure in there, like walk in there one day, walk in there the next day, and then leave it alone for a week, and then they'd move back here a little bit, and then I'd hunt them in between. So this is literally the edge that I would want to scout. This is where I'd want to walk. And I'd probably walk just inside the trees, and every time I saw a trail like the one we just walked in on, I'd come in and check it out. But what you're going to find is most of the bedding's going to be in a spot where you see like a big willow that's just out a little bit. And you know, if I was looking down this, I'd be looking at, okay, there's another willow there, there's another big tree down there. If there's any little points of timber that come out, those are where I'd expect the beds to be. And I'd look for the sign coming in and out of them. Now, this is where I expected the deer to be, and this is where they were. Me and Rick had slipped back here, and we got right in there, and a buck stood up right here and looked at me. He was probably like 130 as you jumped in. And we walked over here and looked at this bed, and another one jumped up, and his bed's probably still there, right here someplace, but we couldn't see it. And the barrel ran through there. But I mean, it was literally 10 steps from us. But all those deer were bedded right in this area, right here, that came in that day. So what are we from the hunting spot? Maybe 80 yards? I don't know. But that's how close you got to be in that window.
So, for early season, or even during season, when would you scout to know
Right
that
now.
they're in here? Right now? And
Yeah.
then just know this for the season? And
I really love scouting like the January, February, March time frame. Then during the season, I'm scouting too, even new spots, but I'm back a little bit looking for sign, and then I try to hunt the same day I find it.
okay.
And a lot of times, like when I'm hunting an area, like say I'm hunting back in that ridge someplace. There's some place over there that nobody goes or whatever, and I'm going back to an island or something. On my way back there, if I got the right wind, I'll come and scout this edge, and if I find something hot, I don't end up down there. A lot of times I don't end up where I'm planning on going, because I find something where I think right now I can kill something right here. And one thing I did a little different at the end of the year here that I used to do years ago is I started getting more into what I used to do of scouting a whole bunch of spots and then going back to the best one and screw the ones that are mediocre. And that really got me on some action at the end. And I think that is a really great way to hunt. But a guy needs a lot of time to do that too. And it burns you out pretty quick. And burns out your terrain. But one thing I want you to look at is the beds. They're a little harder to recognize at this time of the year. But sometimes of the years, I mean, you'd have that matted down grass, but there's always a bed right here. Right now it's kind of hard to see. You can tell the snow's been melted by something. But there's always a bed there. I mean, notice how there's no vegetation here. There's always one, there's one right there, but there's always one on this back side too. I think it's probably what to do with They're always way back in here. All the lesser animals are going to be in the cattails around them in the higher spots. If that makes sense. This is like the spot that he's going to pick. The better spot.
Like you said, I mean, it's snow. I mean, there's water here. It's more than just snow. It's still bed here. It was dry when...
Oh yeah, they're bedding right on the ice right now. Yeah.
Okay.
They wouldn't bed there if there was bare water, but when it's frozen ice, they'll bed on it.
Okay.
If you came in here, now here's the kind of the catch-22. You're talking about when to scout. You come in here now when there's ice and snow. It's a little harder to see the sign because of the snow in the beds. If you come closer to like after meltdown, but it still ain't green up, those beds will show up a lot better. You know, they'll be the shape of a deer and stuff.
I've seen stuff like this before, but I just kind of chalked it up as being so soft when it wasn't frozen that whether deer's just trampling through it and that.
And if I saw something like this, looking at this sign, I wouldn't be really excited because I don't see a bunch of rub lines coming in and out of here, right? And that's probably because there ain't a high population of big bucks, so they're not really competing that much. But what I would do is I chalk it up in my memory. And when I'm out here hunting, I take a cruise past, see if there's any big sign coming out or some big rubs show up here, or maybe I see a big buck across the road into the corn over here. Well, where could he be bedded? Well, there's this spot, that spot, and this spot, and then I'd hunt all these spots down. So a spot like this, I might only hunt this once every 2-3 years. And what brought me here this time isn't these incredible beds, because they're not that incredible, right? What brought me here is I knew there was bucks feeding there and over there, and I come down here and signs showing me they're coming from here, and I remember there's beds underneath that willow, there's beds over here, that's probably where they're coming from, and I made an accurate guess apparently. Went out into here at this spot, walking along here, so you go in and investigate, there's a lone tree. I saw the beds over there melted out. That's not normally where they'd bed because that's underwater, right? But right now there's ice. There's a couple beds right here, and once again you can tell because there's no cattails growing there, right? So earlier in the year they're bedding there. One thing that is interesting is you got deer tracks that come in here, smell it, and come back out. And you'll see that with a lot of these good beds, that when the deer come by and they're looking for a place to bed and they're walking around, they'll go smell all the beds and figure out scent wind-wise where they want to bed. But I see that really often. And if you pay attention, a lot of these beds we're looking at, you're going to see that. The deer will walk in or at some point smell it and decide whether or not he wants to lay there and walk out. 90% of the mature bucks are in that water on the edge of the dry land. So I'm going to follow that edge. I mean, you might find one or two exceptions, but you didn't get onto the action really fast. Just following the terrain. Now you can take a spot like this and you can scout this whole thing in a day.
If it wasn't water, again, going back to CRP or anything else, it's just dry. You still expect them to be out there in that lone tree that's kind of like right on the edge, or maybe in the woods just a little bit?
Well, it's going to depend a little bit. You're hunting that CRP stuff. It might have more to do with the roll of the land.
Okay.
The farm I hunt down the street here, when they bed on that farm, they bed in the CRP a little bit. They bed in the edge of the timber a little bit. But a lot of it has to do with the roll of the land. Even though it's small elevations, 10 feet or so, they seem to still be on the leeward type hills.
Okay.
And we've cut the CRP grass and kept it cut for a couple of years. And then when it grows back, the deer are back in the exact same spots.
Okay.
So it has a lot to do with elevation and with edge.
One other question before I forget. It keeps slipping me. Bed style hunting like this, I think I've read on the forum where you go back to your traditional route or like the funnels and stuff like that during the rut. So I'm not the greatest deer hunter by no means here. I'm trying to learn, but so I mean your rut pre-rut, all that. I mean, you're basically November to through middle of December, something like that. So does this really work only Octoberish?
No, I kill a lot of bucks in rut hunting beds.
Okay, so so it's not.
Matter of fact, we're gonna eventually we'll look at some rut bedding.
Okay, so I was getting a little confused this year reading as far as whether or not you kind of abandon this style and go.
I never abandon it, but I do also hunt some funnels and stuff there, and usually it's not this terrain. This terrain, I'm almost always in the thick stuff. In this terrain, you can't get these big bucks to come roam around these woods during daylight in a rut. Rut, they're probably more scared than gun. There's probably more pressure here during rut than gun season. There's guys everywhere. And cattails are a cakewalk with the tornado knocking that down, eh? Mm-hmm. Usually you have to stick to those deer trails and they're really tight. You know, and even getting out here, coming the way we did, would be really, really hard during the season. The water would be like knee deep and the trails are a maze. And those cattails are actually over your head by quite a bit and a lot thicker than what they are right now. And you'll be in spots where you can't even see where the island is. You won't be able to see it through the cattails.
Coming to this first island here, how much of the pressure do you think you're getting rid of already?
Well, it used to be a lot, but now there's a lot of people hunting this.
But typically any other marsh like this, do you just go through one section of cattails? I mean, is that...
Well, it depends. I've gotten into marshes where the islands are pounded, and I've gotten into them where nobody goes back there. Especially if you got to get wet. You know, a lot of guys are afraid of water for whatever reason. Like you're going to melt or something.
How the heck are you getting here?
I come from the other way. The way we're going to go out is how I come in. I come in from over there. I take dry land most of the way. And actually I got to cross deeper water to get here than coming this way, but for a shorter distance. So I just go through the deep spot. And I think back to about 2 years ago, I ran into somebody at the parking lot, and it was kind of funny because he was an overweight guy, a real big guy. And he had waders on, chest waders. And he recognized who I was, and he said I should hunt this island out here because, man, has he been onto the bucks out here. And he said he's got an arrow in one of them, they can't find it, and shot at 3 other ones, and he's been hunting it every day, and I should go out there and give it a try too. This year when I came out here to hunt, you might have watched a video, it was like one of the first hunts I did last year. I came out here and it was before anybody really started hunting back here, because September you probably got it pretty quiet back here. And I passed that big 6-pointer. That was like a 2 or 3 year old deer, but it had 6 points. It was a cool hunt. I don't know if any of you watched that, but I shot my albino doe on this island. My kid shot a giant out here we never found. It ran across the marsh here and across that hill and into private. But we've killed a lot of big bucks on this island and seen a lot. There's a really good primary bedding area that comes off of the other end of this that we're going to look at. I haven't pre-walked it. There might be shed antlers laying in there. If you guys find something, you can keep it. But generally, the deer get up in the bedding area and come back this way. I don't know what it's going to look like because me and Rick came in here to do a hunt and found a trail camera over the entrance trail and signed that there was a lot of hunters in here, and a beat down trail in the cattails heading straight for the bedding area like somebody was hunting in the middle of it, which I hunt bedding areas, but I don't hunt in the middle of them. I hunt where they come out, right? So I don't know what we're going to find, but that is the primary bedding here, and it's a pretty good setup. It's really paid off a lot over the years. So we'll kind of go in there, and the direction we're going, we're going to look at where I hunt first, and then we'll look at the bedding.
So the other trail that you entrance on,
Mm-hmm.
is that better for the wind too? For
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, it's you're walking into the wind.
Right. Where here you kind of get it going down, right? So an area like this, I look at this and I think, why would a deer want to be here? Well, you got isolated oaks, right? So early season is always a good option. So I do really well here early season because of the acorns. Most of the oak flats out here get a lot of pressure. This don't, because it's isolated out here and cross water and hot out, and people don't want to walk this far in the heat. And then it was the pressure would put them back here would be the next primary thing. So you got to do the detective work. You got to look at something like this and say why, when, where, how. Not just find the beds and say I'm going to set up in these beds, and then to randomly, you know, if it's primary like this is, you could hunt it year round. But there are certain peaks when I would see the biggest deer, and for me it would be right around the opener. If there's acorns dropping, if there's not acorns dropping, it's a ghost town out here. And then right after heavy pressure, put them out here.
How much time would you give yourself to come out here and get set up? The walk?
Now granted, now I'm coming in from a different direction.
Okay.
But it probably takes me, I'd say, an hour to get back here. But you know, you're speed walking most of the way. It's when you hit the water and you're getting close that you got to start being either careful or quiet and slow. So this tree's been really good to me here. Took a lot of deer out of that tree, that angled tree right there. It seems like somebody else likes it too, because we've been walking up, I noticed the tree's cut down. That wasn't cut down last time I was out here. So if you watched that video we were talking about before with the big 6-pointer, he came right up this trail right here and walked through. If you look out, hard to see from this view because everything's kind of gray, but in the cattails there's some trees, some bushes. They bed under those bushes. They get up and they come onto here and they move forward into here, and this is about where they get in daylight. And we've shot a lot of big deer here on this method. I got my albino doe here and several big bucks right here coming out of here. We have had a bed, especially later in the year when it starts freezing, up along here in the brush over there. But generally the best beds are right off that point. So what do we hear, 75 yards? And again, the bigger bucks, you know, right on the edge of darkness is when we're shooting them. But we do get bucks that come out to here an hour before daylight too, so you or before dark. So you do got to get here early, and you got to be quiet.
Is that another small island over there?
Yeah, there's an island over there further, and that used to be good too, but now guys are boating to it because it's along the river. But it's hard to get to too. There's a canal in between. As a matter of fact, a couple years ago, from this tree, I shot a buck during gun season on that island, and that was really fun getting out of there.
A couple swear words.
Oh yeah.
Is that eagle nest up there?
Yes, it is. It's a bald eagle. I've seen it in there. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a funny tree. I actually got to face the stand this way, which I don't like. And I get up where those limbs are because I hang my bow on that one limb. And I'm facing that way, sitting on the stand backwards, sitting on the seat. I generally like having a stand facing the incoming deer. And this one I have to face it the other way. Probably be good for you saddle guys. Yeah. So it was a little disappointing. I expected to see a little more of rubs, especially around the beds. So I was a little disappointed, but it's probably due to the pressure I've been seeing over here. Things that you can take note of is notice how they're isolated by water there, even though they're out by this island. They're going to get themselves isolated. So they're finding some sort of high spots out there. One problem I've had with this spot is sometimes they go the other way. They go through that canal on the other side and go to that island, you know, to feed rather than this way. But overall, it's a really good setup that's worked great for me over the years. How many of you guys do you think you would have recognized this as a good spot? Any of you guys picked this out off the map?
From the map, I think it looked good. I mean, coming in, like, I'd ask him, I'm like, it seems too open. I mean, from what I'm reading, you know, it's, again, why I'm here, trying to see what am I missing. I'm looking for thicker, heavier, you know. Just to me,
I find a lot of guys are getting in too thick of stuff.
And maybe that's what I'm doing.
I'm seeing a lot of these real big bucks can't get through that thick stuff, and you end up more in does and smaller deer is the sign you're seeing in that really thick stuff. Doesn't mean the big bucks aren't around. They're on the edges of it, and they'll use it for escape if they have to. But even when you look at the thicker areas, the more open trails seem to be the ones that the bigger bucks are using because they can't get through that thick stuff. I actually, one time I shot this buck, he caught me off guard. He came running through the doe, chasing this doe, and the doe ran into this thick pile of dogwood, and I didn't have time to get ready. So I got my bow up, I got ready, and he ran into that thick stuff, and he just caught up into his antlers. And he could not get through there, and he kept going backing up and trying to ram through, and he couldn't get through. And when he turned around and walked out into an opening to go around, I shot him. It was because of that thick stuff. But really, I think a lot of people, the term thick is kind of loosely thrown around, and this is thicker than it looks. Right now it's pretty open, but when this is higher grass, it's not really all that open when all these leaves are on and stuff. It is a little more open than it used to be though, because we have a die-off on the ash. So most of these trees are dead. So that makes it a little more open, but I'm sure something will replace it back here sooner or later. Back, and went out in the marsh and found it, ran out in the cattails, ready back up on the island, field dressed it, washed my hands off in the marsh, packed my stand up and stuff. And I go out to the truck, and as I'm walking up to the truck, all these spotlights turn on me, and a bunch of wardens come running out of the bushes. "You're out a little late, aren't you?" So, shot a deer, and I was hunting quite a ways out. Shouldn't take you that long. It was a couple hours after dark, and I'm like, well, I was out quite a ways. Can't get out quite a ways here. You go out a half mile, you hit water. I said, well, it's up to quite a ways. He goes, "I know this marsh really well. Where were you hunting?" It was a new warden. And I says, he goes, what he said was, "I know this marsh really well. I got a map of it on my wall," or something like that. He goes, I said, "Well, you know that spot where this square cutout is?" He says, "Yeah. I was hunting on the island on the other side." He said, "You can't get back there." I said, "You can't get back there." "I can." And he starts giving me a hard time. I says, "Well, how about this? I'll walk you out there, and I'll time you coming back. We'll see how long it takes you to get back." He goes, "Did you take the deer properly?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Have fun getting it out." Over here we got a bunch of brush that tapers down into the marsh. That's going to be a good spot because of that. You look at this edge. If it's just solid trees right up the cattails, it ain't going to be good. There's got to be something that forms bedding, which is going to be higher ground in the cattails. And there's certain terrain features that promote that. Like on the island we're looking at, tapering down into the marsh, right? So you get that water between the land, right? And in here, what we're looking for is turning the terrain. We call that a bowl right here. And you get that point that comes out, right? So that bowl's been pretty good to us right there. It's hard to see, but if you see these trees out here, they kind of come to an end here and go in, and there's a pocket, and that pocket's brushier, has more high spots, has little trees out there. You got a good eye, you can kind of see some of the trees out there, but they kind of blend in with the other trees. And over here, you can kind of see how the big trees kind of disappear and it tapers down to littler trees. If you can't see it, it's not a big deal. We'll go over there and look. That's kind of what we're looking for when we're going along these edges. But you could literally, if you had the time, just walk the whole edge, right? And it's not that far of a walk. I mean, like I said, you can walk around this whole rim in a day and learn this marsh, or any marsh like this. And if you're scouting like a tamarack swamp or something, or some timbered swamp, it's no different. It's just that you can't look over the cattails and see that edge. You're still following that same edge. You're still looking at islands. What you can see in that is if you get in a high spot, you can see a different kind of tree out there. Well, there's a higher spot there, right? Where it comes up out of the tamaracks. You know, instead of cattails, you got tamaracks. So it's just harder to see, but it's the same thing. Just imagine all these cattails being tamaracks, right? Or dogwood, or whatever your swamp has. It's the same thing.
You get much ticks out here?
Ticks get me. Yeah, yeah, it is full of ticks, yeah. So this is the bowl. Did anybody pick this out on the map? So it's harder to see on a map because you can't kind of hardly see the trees in there. But anytime you get that influx of a terrain like that and then you get trees out there, they're always good spots. I think part of it has to do with the way wind goes through there. You get close to that edge and a lot of times your wind just keeps constantly getting carried out there. I think they can smell stuff all the way around, so we actually set up a little further back on this stuff. This spot's been pretty good to us right here. 2 years ago I hunted this opening day and I passed 2 bucks and like 5 does. Rob, didn't you hunt this opening day last year?
Yeah.
You got a doe. Yeah. And I hunted over there opening day, and I had like 5, 6 does with on me, quite a few. And Rick, I think he didn't see anything. He saw a lot.
On the ground. On the ground. I got stuck on the ground. And they're all smoking.
Yeah. That's a good spot though where you're at. So I mean, we can walk the edge and see if there's any trails coming up, but you'll see trees popping up out there, and it'll be the same thing as what we looked at the other spots. The beds will be right underneath those trees. They don't bed here as much in the winter because it's kind of open, I think, but they might be out there. If we see a heavy trail going out there, maybe we'll follow it and see where it goes. But they bed out here randomly underneath those trees, and then they either come in over here or they come in over there. Later in the season, it gets a little better over on that side. Early in the season, this side's pretty rocking. So I'm sure you guys noticed the patches of trees out there. Like looking out here, I can see one big tree. I can guarantee you there's a really good bed right in the base of that tree. And look at the trail coming from there. Now obviously there isn't a lot of tracks on it right now, because you're not wintering in here. But you can see that they were here. I mean, there's rubs everywhere. You can see rubs from early season behind Jeff there too, further back. I mean, some of them are like the one right behind him there from this year, but it's aged to the point where that had to be like September. And the deer would come right up here and up and into the oaks out of those beds. So I would set up right up in this high spot up here, or just kind of over to the side. I wouldn't get too close down here. You always see the buffalo on the edges. And there's a really good tree. It's just so thick. So you kind of get back a little bit. I know you hunted here once, didn't you?
Yep.
Did you see anything?
Not time I hunted, no.
Oh, okay.
This is where I heard that grunt on the last day of the season.
Yeah, I've had a lot of action here over the years. But now the beds are what 70 yards out there, so I'm probably 110, 120 yards back. So we can go out there if you want, but it's just going to be a round patch of snow on flat ground. Underneath, the same thing that we've seen in the other spots, right? And the trails are going to go right to it. And then there's going to be a network of trails, so all the bushes. And every place there's a bush, there'll be a bedding spot. They're not bedding there now, or there'd be tracks going into there. So when I find that sign, I find those beds, and I follow those trails out, and I come out here and I see these rubs and stuff. Then I got to come out here and kind of look for where am I going to set up, and I got to get as close as I can somewhere in here and set up and think about thermals and wind and stuff like that. Yes.
On that first spot we went to, we kind of walked out and there was bedding right on the edge.
Yep.
Now this is an example where here's an edge, but bedding's actually into the cattails on a high spot.
Yeah, if you look, they're usually isolated by water, right?
Right.
At least the best beds. And that first bed was isolated by water. It's just the trees went up to it, right?
Right. The question I have is, would you primarily find more mature bucks where there's a little bit more separation, like in this example, between the main patch of woods compared to the first spot we were at? Or is it kind of arbitrary?
Maybe a little bit, but it's more to do with pressure, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, more to do with pressure. But I think they like that separation with the water. That's the big thing in this type of terrain. You know, anytime you get in a low flat ground, the water is huge. We're into here where I can get all the trails. So any tree I come in here and find and set up on. If I get too far back, the deer start separating. Some of them get in, follow the edge this way. Some of them follow that edge. And like you see a nice rub over here. Most of the deer have been coming out over here like this, and if the sign shows me that, sometimes I set up a little further back. Because you do, I forget who asked me just a minute ago about deer bedding on the edge, you do hit like fawns and small deer and stuff that do jump up on these edges and run in and spook it for you. Then you guys watched that video 2 seasons ago, gun season, where I shot those 2 does when I was hunting with Jake from the Hunting Public. That's what I had them push right down there. And I set up here and shot them as they ran out of that point. One thing I noticed here hunting over the years, and it took me a while, didn't notice until about 10 years ago, was a lot of times during the rut, the deer would come from this way. So I started looking across over here, and what I found was rut bedding. Tore up with big rubs, and real good beds, but you go in there and drive at gun season or something, nothing comes out. You hunt there late season, you don't see that much. Maybe a little bit of activity early season, but rut, it is just ripped up and there's big bucks in there for a little period of time. And there's some good doe bedding over there, and I think that has something to do with it. But the way you can tell rut bedding is deer aren't always there, and the bedding is just tore up with big rubs. And I think it fools a lot of people. They see those big rubs and they start thinking, oh, the deer are here all the time, this is primary, and then they camp out there. But it's a timing thing. I mean, if you start seeing that those beds aren't really all that worn out, and you're not seeing sign other times of the year, all that rubbing activity tells me it's the time of the year when they're really worked up. Rut. And I noticed it not from the rubs, but I noticed it from the deer travel. I noticed that during the rut, I was seeing the bucks come from that direction, so I started looking that way, and then I started scouting that way. And in this little pocket of wet stuff behind me, I found that bedding. So it's not something that you're going to find following that terrain, but then when you start hunting, then you start seeing that other 10% that you're missing when you're with the scouting the edge, right? So I think about years ago, they when we first got CWD in here and it was a big scare and they wanted to kill everything, they did a gun season that was pretty much in rut. And I was sitting on that point and had some guys walking around with cattails pushing some stuff for me. And I had a guy up on the hill here who was first time with us. He was a little iffy, like most of the people I hunt with, you know. So I'm sitting there watching these guys, and he kept asking, what tree? Just go sit up on the ridge, man, you know. So I'm sitting there, and I hear him come walking down, and those guys are just getting close, and I'm like, what the hell's he doing? And I look down, and there's this big buck standing there looking at me, and why he didn't shoot it, I have no idea. But I unloaded my gun on it, and it ran that way, and then I look up, and there's an even bigger one over here. It ran off that way. And the bigger one was probably close to Boone and Crockett. The smaller one got down a little ways, and there was fresh snow on the ground. We tracked it down, and it was a 9-pointer that was probably like 130s. We had Dave on the track, and we all surrounded it. And Dave ended up shooting it right in its bed. It didn't get out of the bed. He saw it in the bed and shot it. And walked over there, and both antlers fell off. But and that was like rut time, you know. But those deer came out of this bed and area behind me. But always around rut, you know. So we'll go down there and take a look at those beds and see if you guys can recognize it for rut bedding. Now, I haven't been in there all year, so I have no idea what we're going to see. But most of the time when I walk in there at this time of the year, it's tore up with rubs, and the beds are pretty visible because there's only one spot they can bed, which is a little bit of a dike where at some point, you know, probably been in the 50s, the DNR dug out a trench, you know, and left some high ground. See how they gotta see over this stuff? You wouldn't even get close to them. And this is one of those spots where you'd have to be kind of up over the ridge a little bit, because otherwise that thermal's going to drop down here before they come out. I expect to see a lot more big rubs. I walked through here the last couple winters and there was a lot bigger rubs. I don't know if you saw the old scarring, but it is what it is, and it's probably why I didn't see nothing when I hunted this during the rut. But I don't walk in here when I'm hunting it. I hunt the trails going off into the oaks or off that way. One spot I like is there's some poplars over there, and they kind of go around that way and go up to the crops out in private land. But this is one of those areas where I think most guys would struggle on how to hunt it. But you kind of got to look at the terrain too, because the trails just kind of come out of here. During the season, it's a little more obvious, but there'll be trails coming through this stuff. But it'll be where the more open areas are. Like they'll come around this side and then go back in, or they'll come in where we came in. Because once again, I mean, they're not pushing their antlers through that stuff. And like I said, I've done pretty well over in that corner. I don't think you can see the poplars from here, but there's a patch of poplars over there that they have to go around if they want to stay in the cover rather than go across the field. Any questions about any of this?
So you were having your does bedding over there on that point where we were first at?
No, I got bucks bedding over there too.
Okay,
it's just during the rut this picks up.
Okay. So are you starting to see them pre-rut? I mean, they start to stage up in here?
Rut time, when you start to see them come in here, is probably like mid-October.
Okay.
Like October 15th or so is about the time they start putting down all that sign is about the start of it. And then that'll end up going into like probably the first week of November.
Gotcha.
Do you ever change your exit route compared to your entrance route, depending on where the deer are going to end up in the evenings?
You mean when I leave?
Yeah.
Most of the time I just trudge straight out, but if I plan on hunting a spot again or in the same area, yeah, then I worry about my exit route. So sometimes I take some difficult exit routes because of that.
Yeah.
Usually my most difficult routes are my entrance routes, because then I'm taking real concern about how the wind's going to affect the hunt of the day. But if I'm going to do multiple hunts in an area, yeah, I do worry about that stuff. However, like if I got a buck pinned down in an area and I'm gonna hunt him down, I might hunt a spot that I don't think is as good as the spot I'm gonna hunt the next day, but it's the progression of hunting so that I'm not bumping that spot, hunting the other spot. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that can be on a daily basis too, on how you hunt the terrain. A good plan, instead of going in and hunting your best spot and walking through all the other spots, might be to hunt the lesser spots and make your way there. But on the other hand, if you don't know for sure there's a big buck there and you don't plan on hunting the lesser spots, then you might just go for gold and hunt the best spots, right?
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what you're doing. Anything else?
What do you look for during the rut? I've seen on one of your videos, you kind of mentioned if you know where the doe bedding is, that's a good place. How would you scout on a map for doe bedding, would you say?
Doe bedding can be really hard in these marshes because it's not as obvious all the time. A lot of times I only know where it's at because I run into it. They do tend in these pressure areas to bed in kind of the same areas as the bucks. They just bed differently. But you see does more in the on the dry land, more in the thick stuff, thick brush. Like when we traverse out of here, we're going to go past a section right instead of these trees where it's just a real thick, nasty area. And you see guys hunting in there all the time, and you see lots of big rubs in there all over the place. And I guarantee you all those rubs are from bucks coming in there during the rut. They're not bedding there. But does are. And you can get in between those does by hunting these bedding areas here. So like when the does are bedding over there and the bucks are bedding here, you just got to get in between here someplace, and get in their route going over there. A lot of times it's difficult too because some of the best buck bedding is right next to doe bedding, and then that buck bedding will become rut bedding too, and be better during the rut than the rest of the year, but it's used year round because of it being adjacent to the does. And then they don't have to go far, you know what I mean? It might be 50, 75 yards. I'm thinking about like I got a spot on the other side of the marsh where I've killed quite a few big bucks out of with the bow. And there are bucks in there year round, but my best hunting has always been around rut because there's an adjacent doe bedding area. And if there's anything big in the area, it always ends up bedding there in rut if it's left unmolested till rut. But they get up and they kind of got the bedding area is kind of set up in a lot of cases to where the does come past the bedding area, and they're monitoring it, with either wind or sight. And it's kind of hard to set up on, but if you know what's going on, you can usually figure out a way. This is that thick stuff I was talking about that attracts a lot of hunters, but really it's mostly full of does. And the bucks come in there at night, at least the bigger ones. So we're hunting them from back here in between, right?
That's exactly what I was asking you earlier when I said it looked kind of open. That's more of what I've always been looking for, thick that came out to a point like that.
Yeah, and that'll be okay if you're in your CRP terrain.
Okay.
But in marsh terrain, they're going to be in the water, isolated. So they're always going to pick the best option. So when you walk around out here, you go up on these ridges and stuff, you start seeing some pretty good hill country. You start seeing some points and fingers and stuff. You won't find a bed on those. If you do, it'll be like a fawn. You'd have a hard time finding a 1.5-year-old bedding off those points. But you go up in hill country, and that's where the big bucks are, right? The same thing in CRP terrain. This would be awesome.
Okay.
That'd keep the pheasant hunters out of it and all that crap, right? But in this terrain, it's got does in there. What does do in there is they get in a thick area and they bed in a circle, and if you find their bedding area, the group will be bedded in a circle, each facing a different direction, and they look out for each other. Where the buck is solitary, he's going to look out for number one, so he's going to get into the nastiest hole he can where you can't get to him without him smelling you or seeing you or hearing you. And he's going to take precaution for all that.
So would a buck walk around here and skirt this area on the right wind?
Sure.
Kind of smell them does. And
yeah, I don't know about this year considering there's no rubs down there, but generally this whole edge here is tore up. Right here where they come into it. And use a little common sense. I mean, a guy's looking at this, oh, rubs all over the place, they're coming out here. Well, they might be coming in too, right?
Right.
So you're hunting a spot in between here and over there?
I'm hunting right on the edge of the stuff, but the deer are coming to here, right? The bucks. This is more rut activity. During the early season, they're going into those oaks. But rut, they're going to come sneaking over here, follow the terrain. Like they like to stay in this thick stuff back here. Follow that. That's all tore up with rubs. That comes from that car that we walked past. The other side where I think Rob had hunted. They'll come through, follow the cover and into here. Any casualties, Jerry? Oh, we're doing better than last year. Don't have to hide anybody or sell their car to somebody. Get rid of the evidence. That buck I was talking about that I shot at, didn't get, and Dave ended up finishing off. It ran through all this cover, busted into this field, and there was fresh snow on the ground. It had just freshly snowing, so we were able to track it. It ran right through this field about 20 yards from the trees, about where we're at right here. Right into here, and it went into that tangle there where we're going to look at next, which is a really good bedding area. And Dave caught up to it and shot it while we surrounded the hill here. He actually walked up to it and shot it in its bed. So, but what was interesting is when we came down here, there was a guy on a chair right here by those poplars, overlooking this whole area. It was all covered with snow, and snow this deep, right? And that buck had come through here. Yeah, the guy was drunk. I'm like, you see a deer? He goes, nothing came through here. And both those big bucks, the tracks came right through here. And then we walked over there. Dave finished it off while we sat up on the hill. And the guy was here when we got here because we saw him coming out. So he was sitting right there and never saw that buck come by. But when he got up to leave, I heard what he had. His whole backpack was full of empty cans, and I saw him shove another one in there. He drank a 12-pack while he was sitting there. So good lesson, don't drink a 12-pack while you're hunting, and maybe you'll see something. We're getting a little closer to the parking lot here. Not that we're close, but now it's open fields to where people park. So they walk this they get down to here pretty easy. So this wood lot up here gets hunted a lot because it's the first one from where they park. But what they don't do is they don't taper down and go into the swamp. And there's always some good bedding up where those trees taper down into the cattails. But again, it's going through some deep water and stuff. You can't get near them, you gotta hunt back. I remember I had a couple of years ago, I had a good buck coming out of there, and I put Mario in there opening day, and he went too far in and heard the deer get up and leave. It's a game of inches, you get too far back, but it's a interesting layout, and it's a good one where we can show the setup real well, how I've set up on it in the past. And the deer come out a little different every time, so you got to set up a little different every time. And we can go in there and look at the beds, and then we can come back and kind of look at the setups and think about what you guys would do, and think of it as familiar to anything you guys hunt. But again, this is pretty close to where we're accessing, so people have easy access to this, but you never see anybody in there. They're always up on the ridge somewhere. So. How good this is going to look, obviously somebody's been in there looking around, but if you look on a map, this is almost like a finger going out there of trees. Like a finger shape. And you see the bigger bedding right on the edge of the cattails out there where it has good escape into the cattails. But people seldom go past these trees in here. They set up in the oaks and stuff where the sign is, where the big rubs are, and the deer just aren't getting there in daylight. Generally where I'm set up is right along this edge here. And even here you have to be super quiet. I know I hunted here once this year, somewhere right around here, and I was in a tree about this big around, but I'm not sure which tree. I know it was dead. It might have been that one with no top on it there. But somewhere's right in here covering all the trails that were coming out. But it varies every year. Sometimes they come out more up here, and sometimes they come out more down here. Generally it's been right in here that they're slipping out of here. And the bedding starts as soon as you hit the cattails where the trees start getting thinner. But the bigger stuff seems to be bedding out further. So the younger stuff comes past first. And then I've got a setup on the other side where they're bedding more in a bowl over there and coming out this way into the oaks over there. So we'll go in here and we'll look at the bedding and see how it looks. Hopefully we got some beds in there. It doesn't look like there's a lot of sign going in there. As soon as we get the snow, they tend to go up on the hills more in bed.
So what do you do if there's no acorns dropping?
I'll look if there's sign. If there's not sign, I don't hunt here. But over the years, this has been a lot better when there's acorns. Early in the season, it's been a good spot. Once again, it's doing the detective work. There's other reasons they come through here. I think rut, this is pretty good if you get in there because the bucks will run through here looking for the does. Heavy the trails are, even though we're in where it's usually waist deep water, that's all deer. So I think a lot of people don't realize that they just live out here. And this is where they are most of the time, at least in daylight hours. So killing them's the hard part. So that ridge gets pounded up there, but those guys aren't killing these deer. They're occasionally getting deer. I mean, they'll get a 1.5 years old or something to walk up there. But the mature bucks just know better. I mean, they've been that routine several times. So what we're doing is we're getting just to the other side of here, as close as we can get, within about 75 yards. And then, in this particular spot, we're almost always, when we shoot one, it's on the edge of darkness because of they know there's pressure on that ridge. Any questions about any of this?
Do you even pay attention to that type of stuff? We walk past a bunch of it, and it's just kind of like, we go to a finger, we go to a point. It's not. Yeah,
it's just rubs. I mean, what makes you pay attention is when it's high up on the tree, and it's a bigger round tree, this bigger. But the height has way more appeal to me than diameter. I've seen some pretty small bucks rub some pretty big diameter trees and rake their antlers on them. But what I haven't seen is a small buck rub a tree up really high. That's usually mature bucks. If the rub starts at the center of it, not the top of it, but the center of it gets to your waist or higher, it's usually a mature buck. It's a pretty good one. But those rubs in most places don't tell you anything except for there's a buck on the property. And that's what would make you start looking into these spots. When you're seeing the rubs in these spots, now those are made in daylight because they're in a spot where the deer are in daylight. Night, they come out of here. Daytime, they come in here. We hunt them during daytime, so we have to be close to daytime, areas. And for whatever reason, most people don't seem to understand that. They're sitting out on food sources and stuff where they feed at night. And the older the deer, the more they're going to follow the rules because they've been down that road, they've gotten shot at. They understand what happens when they come out of here. So they come out in the safety of darkness.
Any focus on scrapes, really?
If the scrape is on the exit of a bedding area.
Just the exit, that's all you care.
But when you bring that up, some of the best and biggest bucks I've killed have been over scrapes. And the type of scrape is what's important. It's a scrape where two bedding areas exit and stage in the same spot, and there'll be a scrape there where they're communicating to each other. That's where I've killed some of my biggest bucks for whatever reason. They tend to come to that spot right away as soon as they leave their beds, like there's a competition between the other buck or something.
So you're getting set up back there for this area.
Mm-hmm. I'm getting set up as soon as, right where we stopped, started to walk in here, that's where I set up. And my setup changes all the time because of where the trails come through. But generally, the one we came in on, where I searched around a little bit till I found it, that main trail is the one I usually set up on. But I set up further back. But I don't want to be in that wood. They don't get in there in daylight.
So if you see like a fresh rub right on the trail
coming out of here, that's important. Yeah. I find it up on the ridge, it just tells me there's one down here, but it doesn't tell me what trail he's on, and that's not daylight, right?
Yeah.
But down here they're more important because this is where they're at in daylight, where we can kill them.
Would you think that that's kind of high up because they're staying in the water when they're making that?
It could be. This water is actually pretty deep. It varies from, there's probably spots where you can stand where the water's at the, here, but there's also spots where you'll be up to here. So it depends on how deep the water is around that, but those could be higher than they appear. You're absolutely correct. Overall, what I'm seeing is I'm not seeing a lot of big buck sign in this whole area right now. I expected that this area in here would have some big rubs in it, that rut bedding would have big rubs in it. There'd be bigger rubs coming off of that point. So obviously a lot of those deer probably got killed. There was a very large buck running this that I was watching right up till season, and I never seen him once season was here. And obviously he ain't living back here, or there'd be sign of him. And that's something that people got to understand. I mean, if you're hunting an area and there's no sign, there's no big bucks. I mean, there's got to be big buck signs somewhere. So they leave rubs, they leave tracks, they leave sign. If you're not seeing it, move. So abandon that spot, keep moving.
When you say you were watching that big buck, what are you doing to watch?
I was glassing them and shining them.
Okay.
I was watching them cross Highway E into here and out of here. I was watching them cross Highway F in and out of here. And the funny thing is that last video I did, the neighbors across the street contacted me, basically because I said something about them. I said they don't like me very much, so I didn't go on their property.
Yeah.
And they said, we like you, we watch your show all the time.
Oh.
And they have a relative that I used to work with who's really don't like me. So I mentioned that. I said, well, your relative really don't like me. And he said, we don't like him either. So I'm like, all right, then we'll get along. You know?
Yeah.
And they sent me pictures of all the bucks. Oh, and the one that was crossing the road was a lot bigger than I thought. It was probably 170s. Really big buck. I thought it was like 150s, and I put a weekend or two into it and went after something else.
So you must have a whole lot of different spots that you're watching, and then you'll hammer them when the wind is right?
I hunt about 7 or 8 counties in Wisconsin a year.
Oh, okay.
I scatter myself around.
You have to with stuff like this going on.
You don't have to. Actually, sometimes you're better off concentrating on an area. Sometimes I come back to like my home turf and find out there's something really big there that I never even knew about, and would have been easy, you know. But I think generally, if I keep moving, I get on better stuff.
So in other words, you're shining until you see a shooter buck. You won't even hunt that area.
I wouldn't say that. It depends on what I'm seeing. You know what I mean? I'll throw sits at an area that I think usually has a big buck in it, but I prefer finding a deer knowing he's in an area and hunting him down. I think it's easier to do. If you know he's in there somewhere and you've got some intel on him, finding him ain't so hard. I mean, I look at an area like this, as this is tiny. This is easy. He's going to be in 1 of 10 spots if he's here. But other people look at this and go, it's so immense, how would you ever find a deer in here? It's all relative to how you look at it. And that's the real thing I'm really trying to install in you guys right now, is that when you're walking around out here, all we have to look at is that edge. All your sign is along that edge. Not all of it, but over 90%. And then start putting your mind into it. Okay, where aren't people going and why? And look at the best spots we're looking at. I mean, who's coming out here if they got to wade in water this deep? I mean, how often do you run into a guy walking around the public land with waders on that ain't one of us? Not very often. Most guys are up in the ridges and stuff. So it's the places where people don't go, that's on the edge of water and trees, and the transition. So right here we're on a transition of timber into cattails, right? So this timber here, what this tells me is a tree don't grow in water. They got to have some dirt. I guess they do down the south, like Louisiana or something. They have trees that grow in water, but here they don't. They have a little hump of something dirt sticking up, and that's what they're growing out of. So that them humps are what deer bed on. You know, that dry stuff, they can't bed in water either. So seeing these trees out here, this is as far as they can get where they can bed. Now you do get some spots where there'll be spots out in the middle of these cattails where there's a higher elevation of cattails where there really isn't any brush, and there'll be beds there and they'll live there. But for the most part, it's on the edge here. It's on this transition of that timber into the water. And most of the big bucks that live in these areas, if you walk this transition, you walk through every place he beds.
You say the same is true for like farm country, like the edge part of it?
Yeah, it's a little different, but they're going to be kind of the lowest and almost the lowest and almost the highest elevations, or right on the edge.
Oh, cornfield and
woods, or
Marsh
CRP and woods, or you know. What they love to do in that terrain is get a woods to their back, wind to their back, so they can smell the woods and just look out in front of them. And here they're not really using their vision very well. They're not using scent very well either, but try walking up to them. They get the sound factor really well here.
Make that assumption that they got to go all the way deep as in the woods as they can get, and that's where all the deer are. And
right, and that's just not true. But that's the assumption most people have. And even when somebody it starts to dawn on them where these things really are, it's really hard to get that back into your mindset, because everywhere you go and everything you look at tells you to go into the woods. But that's not really where the big bucks are.
So you hunt, you said 7 or 8 different counties. Do you look for terrain like this? And then just
I hunt all different kinds of terrain. I love hunting this terrain early season, when I can get really close to the bedding. When they're on an acorn feeding pattern, they get really killable.
Kind of like that challenge in Minnesota.
Then when it gets to be like rut, I love hill country, because you can read that like a map. You know right where those bucks are going to be based on the wind, by looking at where are the leeward sides, where are the points coming off those leeward sides, you know, what's overlooked, and you can just narrow down that property really easy with a topo map. And in late season, I like farm country because they're so dependent on food and they bed so close to food. The trouble with the farm country in late season is that if they're bedding on the edge of timber watching that food, and you go waltzing under, there's a rub sitting right here. Also, where are all the deer? Well, they're watching you. So farm country, I usually sit back a little bit and watch it and see where the deer come from, and then I make a move to kill them. If that makes sense.
Yep.
But that's how I like to do it, if I have my way. But in reality, I usually end up there's some buck in the marsh I want to hunt, or some buck over here I want to hunt, and I just hunt wherever I want to hunt.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, that's the way you would do it. Marsh, hill, and then farm country.
So in 2 weeks you're doing hill country, you said?
I'm going to try. I'm going to try and do a hill country one.
Where are you going to do that?
Probably around Madison.
Madison.
I got to look at the property first and make sure it lays out all right. I don't want it to be boring. I've hunted there before. There's a TV show host that owns the property that it's not a really great property. Don't take it like that.
Yeah.
But he's got a little minor TV show, and I've hunted there with him a few times. He's a buddy of mine, and I liked it, but I haven't hunted there in years. And I called him up and said, "Hey, you want to do this?" He says, "Okay, but we got cattle up on the tops all over the place. Come look at it first." So I just want to make sure that he hasn't cattle sized it and there's no deer there, you know, kind of thing.
Right.
Before I go there. I'm really excited about doing a big woods one because I want to go rip apart this area where I was hunting the bear bait buck. I don't know if everybody knows that story, but I had a buck come into a bear bait in the Northwoods, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it no longer was a bear bait, because that buck became over 200 inches and had over 18 points. And I've got thousands and thousands of pictures of that thing coming in and eating donuts out of my bear bait. You'd have a bear hitting that bait, and he'd be in the background of the picture watching the bear, waiting for him to open it. It was crazy. Yeah. I wish I would have put more into that deer. I almost killed him.
So, how often do you go after a buck you never laid eyes on it? You're seeing big prints and you're seeing rubs that are high up?
I do all the time. I love doing that. It's a little harder, but there's a part of me that it's not really about killing a deer. It's the fun of the chase, and I love figuring them out more. So I've got areas that I have figured out so well that if there's a deer bed in there, I'm going to kill it. And for me, I mean, for most people, I think they just keep going there and killing the deer. I just love the idea of going out, figuring them out, and doing it right and figuring it out and killing them right. And when you go to the same spots, just doing the same thing over and over again. And that's just me. I'm not saying other people should be like that. It's just something that's installed in me. I like the adventure of going out and being in new areas and figuring them out and mapping them out. There's something in me that makes me want to do that. I get bored of the same stuff over and over again. Anything else?
That edge, that carries over farm country, right?
Oh yeah. Edge is huge. In farm country, I think a lot of people think the deer are in the middle of those wood lots. Mm-hmm. They're usually on the downwind edge, or they're in an opening in the middle of it. They love openings. The openings will swirl the wind in there and stuff, especially thicker openings like where it's grassy or a little hole of marshy, you know. Fence lines where nobody walks.
Yeah.
All right, let's go out of here, and if we follow that trail back, we might be able to find that setup I had from earlier this year. And then we'll look at the bedding over here further and a point over there on the way back out. I was talking about last time I had, a couple of years ago, Mario come down in here and hunt. This is the tree he hunted out of. I'm 99% sure. And if you look, the first bed was like where that heavier tree is out there. Was that 30 yards, 35? When he was climbing, he heard a deer get up there and leave, and then he never saw nothing. And the difference is I'm hunting about where that poplar is, and I'm seeing the deer. That's how close it is. It's a game of inches, you know. A few steps too far and you're done. A few steps too far back, if you were over where the trees are, you're not seeing them. This area, when Mario hunted here, I'm kind of surprised that there was a lot of rubs in here. I don't even see the scars now. Well, I guess there's scars on like that tree, but there was a lot of rubs in here when he hunted. But we knew there was a deer in here, that's why we had him hunt here. But I didn't take him down and say, set up back here. I just said, this is where they are. And Mario was good enough to figure it out, and he knew what he'd done wrong. He said, I slipped in there too far. I heard him get up and leave, and then nothing came out. So just, you know, really trying to show you that it's a game of inches. And right now it might look a little ridiculous, like, hey, it was too close, obviously. But when those cattails are high and stuff, this is really a lot thicker than it appears. And once he came into here, he had to keep going because he can't set up in that stuff. It's just too thick.
Sure, early season, this is pretty nasty.
Right. This is probably the first place he had an opening. Once he got in here, he pretty much had to set up.
Yeah, you can see it's like the only opening here once all the leaves are on it.
Right, where for me it was the other side of the trees for the opening.
You ever see where you notice a whole bunch of pressure up on these ridges where the bucks are still in this marsh, but they just become nocturnal and they don't come out at all?
They'll move around in here, but they won't come up on the ridge when there's a lot of pressure up there. Generally, when we get pressure on that ridge, and I don't know if it's the same where you hunt, but generally a guy will put up a stand, an illegal stand, and leave it there. He'll chain it to a tree, which we're not allowed to do, but they'll do it. And I like that because then I know exactly where he is. And the deer like that because they know exactly where he is. And they'll just move and come out a different area. And that's where I got to shift around a lot. Most of these trails are pretty traditional. They're used year after year after year in the same spots. But that pressure will start to change those trails. One year you'll see it up further than where it was the year before. And it's really they're going around the pressure that's on the hill. They're avoiding the people.
So you do still, if they're in here, you still see some sort of daylight movement if you're able to get close enough.
Yeah. If you get within 50, 75 yards of that deer, I think you see daylight movement. I look at it like this, and I'll tell you, a deer has what I call a safe zone. All right. He's bedding here, and he thinks this area here, he knows anything that's going on, and he feels like he can walk around in there, and he's going to stage up to the edge of that. And that's where, at that edge, I don't know what happened after this point, you know, while I was laying there. Something could be, there could be some danger past there. So he's going to get to that point and then kind of, if the pressure was hard enough to make them nocturnal, to the point where they wouldn't move in here, they just leave.
Gotcha.
They go to some other bedding area. But they're going to move within that
safe zone.
That safe zone in daylight, regardless.
Okay.
So even if you're seeing guys just pounding the crap out of this ridge, as long as there's hadn't been any infiltration, you feel it's still worth it?
Yeah, it's worth at least a sit to see. I mean, if I came down here, there's no tracks on the trails and there's no rubs, and I still got time in the day, it's probably plan B. But if the sign's here, the deer are here probably. And there's times you come down here and you think, oh, there's pressure up there and there's sign down here, and you hunt it and nothing comes out, and maybe the pressure did influence, but you give it a shot. I've shot deer right next to permanent stands and stuff where deer are still bedding where they're bedding. They're just monitoring the guy that's hunting there. You know, they just find a way around you. Sometimes. Some deer are more paranoid than others. I think they're like people. They get personalities. I mean, did you ever do a deer drive where you get out of the truck, you close the door, and a deer jumps up 400 yards away and takes off running, and you're like, what the heck? And the next one, you go and you're sitting there talking forever and, you know, having sodas or whatever around the trucks. And you do a drive 20 yards from the parking lot, and those guys are lining up, the deer are right there. And you're like, they're there the whole time we're standing there talking. Every deer's got kind of a different personality, or maybe even a different trust of their bedding area, you know, per se. I've set up right here a couple times successfully. Not in years, but probably 15, 20 years ago I used to shoot some deer here. Trying to figure out what trees I was in. I think I hung out of that tree and that dead pine that wasn't dead at the time. But there's some really good bedding right in between this spot and that island over there. That island is a point that goes out to the road. That used to be a really good spot, but people found it because it's isolated by water all the way around, and you got to park someplace and walk all the way down. But somebody started parking right on the side of the road there, and matter of fact, a local guy in town shot a big 12-pointer there and told everybody he shot it there, and then it started really getting a lot of pressure. Yeah, guy that owns the store in town, the Pickett store. He doesn't work there; his wife does. But anywho, but the deer are kind of trapped in here in the middle. There's some little trees in there that they bed in around in here, and there's a network of trails in here. And if they go up on that high ground in daylight, they get shot. And if they go up there, they get shot. But you can get them here, or I can get them back in this pocket of nastiness over here before they cross the road into the crop. A lot of times they come out of here and go that way. When I see them come this way, there's always been early season when there's acorns dropping up here. Then they'll come this way. And again, it's a matter of being able to say, okay, there's 3 trails coming out of this bedding area. Where are they going and why? If there's a trail coming over here and it's not going to the crops, probably because they're feeding over here, or maybe they're checking on does bedded back in here and they're following the bedding areas. You know. So this is interesting because there's no heavy trail going back and forth, and I think what it is because back in September or whatever that tornado came through and wiped all this out, so it probably, this is how it's looked since September, I'm thinking. But there used to be a pretty heavy trail. I'm sure there still is, it's just knocked down. And what would bed here if it's all open around these trees, right? So did any of you look at this spot on your maps? No? You did? This point that comes out, there's parking up there, parking where we park, but no parking here. There's water here to the road and a deep canal and water there to the road. So a guy either has to park down there and walk, or he has to pry his car off the road and come in. And there's some guys that come in here and they hunt along this edge up in here, right next to us here, like where that cedar tree is, and there's a lot of sign of hunting in there. But I've done quite well on the back side, and if you look at your maps, you'll see there's like a hook that goes back towards the road, right on the point of that hook. But that's also where that guy from town shot the 12-pointer, so it's got a little abused now. But that's always been a really good bedding spot. They bed right on that tip underneath these big willows. And we could actually see the willows from where we first went, and you guys were looking across the marsh. I saw some people looking over there when I was talking about big willows on the edge. So we'll walk around and look at that point, see how the bedding looks on there. Pointed out, somebody's been cutting shooting lanes in here, and this has been going on for about 3-4 years. I quit hunting here when it happened, but you guys hunting out of that tree. If they find a spot like this and they have success once or twice, then they camp out in that spot. So I wasn't sure if he was still going to be here, but he was here last year in force. You can see he's even been here recently. He's got tracks going up to his tree. Those might even be from season, because their season just ended recently, and the snow's been on the ground since then. But obviously he's hunting out of that poplar tree there. But I used to have this to myself. This goes to the road. Like I said, there's no parking. That's what made this a good spot. But now people have found it, right? But it's a good spot to look. And what we have here is this is it rolls around into this finger that comes out of here. Now, if I'd never been here before, I'd be looking at that little point over there too. But having been here, I know that there's no bedding over there for whatever reason. But it would be one spot that I'd scout. I'd be looking at these features coming off of this stuff, right? So usually right here, the bedding is all around that willow tree. Is where we see the buck bedding, and a little bit off to the side over here. And this is about as close as I would set up. Earlier in the season, I'm even a little further back because they'd come around to the oaks. But I have successfully crept into right about here and hunted a couple of times. But I crept into here a couple of times and spooked deer too. And I know I've hunted out of this tree right here, but not very high. Just over the bushes, like just out of reach. And you got to be super quiet when you do that stuff. You got to remember too, looking at this, you're thinking that's probably ridiculous, but you're, you know, this much deeper, and the cattails are this much higher. and there's really a wall between you and that, and you can see the willow tree. Really, you can't see over this stuff. This is a lot higher during season, so it kind of fools you a little bit. That's going to be a challenge for you too if you haven't set up like this. You go and you set up a spot, and then when you come back in season, it's a jungle you can't shoot through. And when the deer walks and you can't even see nothing but the head and the neck, and you're like, oh. But after a while, you get used to that, and your setups get correct. So let's take a walk through those beds and stuff, and then when we get done looking at them, we'll cut across the marsh back to where we started, and then we'll get together as a group and talk about what we learned, and then we'll head off to eat.